Welcome to a Fortt Knox update. I'm John Fortt here with Druva CEO Jaspreet Singh. It's been a while. Good to see you. Love to get an update. I know your annualized recurring revenue is doing nicely, and there's been a lot of talk around AI and security, but haven't talked as much recently about data security and the area that Druva focuses on. What's the latest?
Yeah, good morning, John. Always great to see you. Data is hot, and so is obviously so is security and AI. And there's been historically last 30 years a lot of effort on preventing or detecting attacks on a variety of infrastructure. But we've seen all around us data is still compromised pretty often, across across the enterprise. So Druva's focused dominantly on securing this data, and what you're positioning is data security as sort of not an afterthought to recover, but as and continuously making sure data is always on, always recoverable from any attack vector which may happen in enterprise.
So, since generative AI became so buzzy, and everybody seems to be incorporating different aspects of that into either communicating what the software is doing or has done, or helping certain agents communicate with other agents, how are you deploying it within your products?
It's a great question. Given Druva's strength is, the entirety of customer data is now centrally backed up and stored in a single location in the cloud. The AI is pretty powerful. The data is sitting next to the world's most powerful compute, and as the threats sort of modify and sort of expand in their nature, traditional view of data backup was used to be a sort of a dead end for the data. It's supposed to be a graveyard for all your information to go and just live there. The modern view of data and data protection is, can I use this information to really understand the threat vectors and mitigate them? But now if you think of data not as a repository, but as a graph, exploring data and its relationships becomes very complicated and could be, a lot of permutation combination. Because the AI comes in, and what we launched called Dru Investigate is a way for investigators, security professionals, to investigate data. What's happening with my data, what's changing, who's changing it, who's modifying it, and sort of all the relationships surrounding data, so they can investigate a cyber event with extreme detail and proficiency without learning yet one more tool.
So give me an example of when this is used. Is this only used in incidents that have resulted in some kind of loss? Is it just any type of attempted intrusion? What's the utility in getting that granular look at what exactly has happened?
Absolutely. So if you think about anatomy of sort of a cyber attack, right? There are sort of 4 stages of an attack, right? The first stage is something called weaponization, where threat actors know and learn about your organization. Second stage is called exploit, where they actually exploit a vulnerability. And this is where majority of industry has been focused on. If you think about Palo Alto, Zscaler, CrowdStrike, they focus on making sure an exploit does not happen to an organization. If it does happen, though, the third stage is called lateral movement, or persistence, where the threat actor goes across the organization and finds the right target. And this could take months to happen, or sometimes even years to happen, right? And then eventually a breach or a broom happen where you actually exploit the data or the application, right? So when investigators have to investigate the whole thing, they are very used to investigating a system like Splunk or a SIM-like system to really understand what's going on with all the breadcrumbs. But there's no data of record. They don't have a way to understand what's happening to my data, right? What changes are happening, who's making them, what's a sign of reinfection, what's a sign of malware persistence in my organization. And it's pretty critical to know all these things to have a foolproof recovery, to avoid any reinfection. So incidents like these being investigated in a large enterprise happen on a daily basis. Now, they may not all be breaches, but they still have to be investigated to fully understand the scope of a potential malware breach. And sort of Dru Investigate really helps to turn the data into a search repository of different artifacts to be seen, to be explored, to be investigated in a clear, natural language processing way.
So That raises questions for me about the utility of Gen AI. That I imagine if you've got a bunch of data points and details, and sort of you've got the fingerprints and the locations and the boot prints and things like that that are indicating how entry might have happened, what the intruders might have touched, how long they were there, etc. That could be formed into a natural language narrative that then you can match against or contrast against others when you're wondering, were these the same people? Were these the same methods, etc.? How then does that record, that natural language record, both get generated and then get used and perhaps compared to other records over time?
This is great, and you're absolutely right in your understanding and narrative. Think about an example, right? You want to, GenAI is very good in what used to be called composable apps in enterprise. An enterprise used to build some static apps, where you used to explore relationships, right? You could be, for example, we want to know, who logged on to my system. How many did John Ford log on within the US or outside the US? And what did John Ford do to my system? Show me all the changes he did. Show me everything which doesn't look like him. Then show me all the data which may map some other entities, because John Ford, you know, tampered one system, but he did have access to 10 other systems. What happened to those systems? To the graph relationships, if you have to build a static UI for something like this, it's extremely hard for enterprise to put all the permutation combination. This natural language, you could simple query system like we're talking. Right? Show me John logged all activities. This system, interesting. Explore more. Show me all the changes to the system. Show me all other system with similar changes. Show me what else did John do. And you ultimately collecting what's called artifacts, which are used for a forensics view or used for disposition, used for legal matters, and very, very interesting way to collecting stuff and exploring a very complex nature of data and graph.
Okay. What else are customers demanding, or what other innovation possibilities do you see opening up in this environment with the tools and resources now available?
I think there's a lot of innovation. It's very, very early days of what's called a data security world, because preventive security or perimeter security was all focused on network and endpoint and avoiding an exploit. Traditional backup was very much focused on a recovery from dominantly an application failure, right? But when a cyber attack happens or an exfiltration event happens, then you have to understand the recovery differently. You have to understand what was my data and was it compromised? Do I know it was compromised? Do I know what is mine and what's encrypted or corrupted? How do I avoid reinfection? And these are very tough questions. Security teams do not fully understand, because while they understand threats, they don't understand the nature of data and applications. The IT teams understand data and application. They don't understand the nature of threats, right? So the biggest gap, frankly, in enterprise isn't a product gap. It's the operations gap, to make sure they can bring operations and IT together, operations and security together, to really combat the idea of a foolproof recovery. And Druva is one of the tools which would make that whole process seamless, and foolproof for an enterprise.
Where do you fit into the platformization strategy that so many of the big names, a couple of which you mentioned earlier, CrowdStrike, Zscaler, et cetera, are pushing? Are you more aligned with some ecosystems than with others?
Yeah, so think of the classic cybersecurity guys in the NIST framework. If you look at the framework of prevention, detection, response, and recovery, the right side is all about prevention and detection, whereas the classic, players play in. The left side is supposed to be response and recovery. How do you respond to an incident? How do you investigate an incident? Then eventually, how do you recover? So we are sort of more the left side of this equation, and we have to integrate very, very well with security teams to understand, how does CrowdStrike, describe a, indicator of compromise? How do we then take it to make sure it's never recovered again? Or how do we make sure that we can point to other possible systems which may have same indicators of compromise as this system in discussion, right? So response and recovery is us, and prevention detection is where classic cybersecurity plays in.
But then I imagine because one flows chronologically after the other, some sort of handoff might be helpful.
Oh, absolutely. So that's why we are integrating with many players. I think we are pretty soon announcing a major integration with one of the leading players, and many of them in the flow. In the past, we've integrated with Splunk, we integrated with Sumo Logic, and many of the firms to sort of really bring together this combined understanding of how do you do handoff between detection and response to detection, because while they're logically linear, but in a very cyber event nuanced approach, like you're probably going back and forth pretty commonly. So I think um, building an integrated view of the world is very critical in this world.
Makes sense. Public markets in the near horizon or far?
Hopefully near horizon. The public markets, I think what we are doing what we can do best: execute. Cyber data is super hot. We are executing, growing. Tons and tons of customer traction. And now we have to understand the public markets. Before COVID, only 20 SaaS companies used to go public every year, and that number went to 57, and then came down to 3. So hopefully it settles down at a good number, and we can make a way out.
That's a tough thing to figure out. I mean, it seems like a rare environment where the overall market indices are doing really well, but smaller software companies have had a rocky, bumpy time.
Yes, I think the smaller players, size in this equation solves a lot of, normalizes your growth and your sort of approach. So yes, I think the market is a lot more favorable to mid size or larger size, mid cap, large cap companies, and the markets also have the mind of their own and can change anytime, and we are growing, and sort of it may be meeting of the mind pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when the complaint on Wall Street was, or about Wall Street was, boy, all the companies are big, and there aren't smaller companies to invest in anymore at a stage where there's still growth. Now people are so focused on the bigger companies, they're letting the smaller companies languish with unambitious valuations. I wonder if a decade from now we'll look back at this time and say, man, you could have thrown a rock at or a dart at a dartboard of smaller software companies and hit a winner almost just by default.
Yeah, the stock market absolutely has oftentimes a herd mindset, and sort of I would personally bet 18 months time frame for the whole shift from mid cap to small cap, or understanding of like where's the growth going to come from. In an uncertain market with high interest rates, naturally investors gravitate towards safer pastures, but the growth will be indexed towards smaller companies as we go forward, especially as the market improves and the interest rates improve. So my bet is on that in a 12 to 18 month horizon.
Well, then I'll look to see you in New York more often.
Absolutely.
Jaspreet Singh, CEO of Druva, thanks for joining me for a Fortt Knox update.
Thank you very much.